I thought I might share a few bloopers from church bulletins and newsletters just to help us have a little laugh or so. Um, you can't hear me very well? I don't. I can yell. Well, that may be very. Did you adjust it? Okay, because he can adjust it, but I'm telling you, when I have to turn my head to read or whatever, I may not be able to do the same thing than to keep my mouth right here. Okay, so this is from a church bulletin. The morning sermon, Jesus walks on water. Evening sermon, searching for Jesus. That wasn't planned out very well, was it? The outreach committee has enlisted 25 members to make calls on people who have not been afflicted with any church. The third verse will be sung without musical accomplishment. Next Sunday, we will have a soloist in the morning service. Then the pastor will speak about the terrible experience. Ladies, don't forget the rummage sale. It is a good chance to get rid of those things not worth keeping around the house. Bring your husbands. The agenda was adopted, the minutes were approved, and the financial secretary gave a grief report. If you choose to heave during the postlude, please do it quietly. We've probably never had any typos in our bulletins or newsletters. Okay, chapter 29 of Genesis. You recall we have looked at Isaac and Rebekah and the dysfunctional family that was operating there. We looked at Jacob, who was the heel grabber, the deceiver, and he tricked his father into giving him the birthright. Tricked his brother into tricked his father into getting the blessing and tricked his brother into getting the birthright. And then mom hears that Esau is plotting to get his revenge by killing his brother, and so she says, "You gotta get out of Dodge. You gotta get out of town." And so she tells Isaac, "I can't bear it if he marries a local lady. He needs to go back to where my brother lives and marry a relative." And so we pick up in chapter 29. Where he's doing just that. Jacob is going back to the Laban, which is Rebekah's brother. It says, "Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, 'My brothers, where are you from?' 'We're from Haran,' they replied. He said to them, 'Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?' 'Yes, we know him,' they answered. Then Jacob asked them, 'Is he well?' 'Yes, he is well,' they said, 'and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep.' 'Look,' he said, 'the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture.' 'We can't they replied, until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep. While he was still talking to them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of her uncle Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He told Rachel that he was a relative of her father, a son of Rebekah, so she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home, and there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my flesh and blood." Okay, so he finds where his uncle is living. He meets Rachel, who is a shepherdess, and he's immediately attracted to her. And ladies, tell me, is this a Hallmark movie kind of thing? There's something weird about this, though, isn't there? I mean, he sees her, he kisses her, and he starts crying. Now, if some guy comes up to you that you never met before and kisses you and starts crying, what's your first reaction? I mean, then he goes on to explain he's related to her father, and then she runs home and tells her father. If I were her father, I'd be going, "You better run home and tell me." And but her father is a different character too, isn't he? We already know some about him, and I want you to take note that, okay, he notices her, but that's not all that he notices. Did you see? In verse 10, Jacob saw Rachel. What else did he see? Yeah, those sheep. We know that Jacob is looking out for who? Jacob. And so he sees a good-looking woman, but she's got a lot of sheep too. That's money. That's cash. That's there's the attraction. Now, Laban, when he hears that Jacob is here, he runs to greet him. What do you think he's got on his mind? The last time that someone was sent from Abraham, you remember, to get his sister Rebekah for Isaac, he came with a lot of stuff, right? Gold, jewelry, all kinds of wealth. I guarantee you that's what Laban was thinking, except this is a totally different story. This man's penniless. He's left because he's been a deceiver, and now he's going to the extended family. And so, like I told you last week, the deceiver is meeting up with a more experienced deceiver in this situation. Let's pick up in verse. Yes. Yeah. No. That would have not been the normal thing for a man to kiss a woman. Yes, you're right. And still to the Middle East today, if you see any news or any filming in the Middle East, you'll see men come up and kiss other men on the cheek as a way of greeting. But you don't do that to the ladies as a man. So this would have been, it's a little odd. And well, he knew, but she didn't know. We get the indication she doesn't. He then tells her after he's kissed her and starts crying, which I just think, okay, he's probably got a lot playing in his head. He's heard the story. He knows how Dad got his mom, that the servant went, and he knows that whole watering the camels. How stories are passed down through the family. He surely has that in mind, but this is not that kind of setting. But I think he's all primed to find a wife and settle down and escape his troubles. And she doesn't know him from Adam for a little bit until he explains further. And then picking up, it says, after Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. So he's living there, and he's working for him, and he clearly has some skills in knowing even how to take care of sheep and when they should be watered, when they should be out to pasture, and that kind of thing. Verse 16, now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, I will work for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Now, we don't know exactly what weaker eyes means. There are other translations of this word that says the word delicate, but we don't really know what that means. But clearly in this passage, we have a description that one daughter is far more attractive than the other daughter, and Jacob is not interested in the older sister. He's just interested in the younger sister. Verse 19. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me. So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. So he labors for 7 years to, this is basically, he's paying a dowry. He's paying to be able to gain her as his wife. And verse 21, then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, my time is complete, and I want to make love to her. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as his attendant. That culture, being much like the Middle Eastern culture today, a lady would have been wearing a veil. So there's real deception involved here. I can't help but to think, poor Leah. Her dad is he's manipulating this whole situation, and we can all feel bad for Jacob in that he got deceived. But I can't imagine how Leah must have felt as far as her own personal value. We find out as we read on that Laban's reasoning, his logic is, we never give away a younger daughter. You give away the older daughter first. But what does that say also? If my daughter doesn't get married, she's just a burden to me. I'm stuck with her. I have to take care of her. She needs to be passed on to another man, and then the daughter that's really wanted can be passed on as well. This is a really messed up thing. And it's right there in the Bible. People that think, oh, the Bible, it's just it's just all a religious book and everything's marvelous and wonderful. Well, no, it's full of messy people, just like today, you know? So, verse 25, when morning came, there was Leah. Okay, so he doesn't realize till morning. So Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me? So the deceiver has been deceived. Laban replied, it is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work. Wow. So this is really dirty and underhanded. Okay, you talk about not having very good relations with your in-laws. This really is not a good setup, is it? And Jacob did so. He finished his week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife, and Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love with Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. So he didn't want the first one, and nothing has changed. Leah's just someone he has to deal with, which, again, how horrible for her. So we've gone from one dysfunctional family to another family that's going to multiply the dysfunction in how they operate. And in this, I think it is appropriate sometimes as we read Scripture and we see really bad stuff happen for us to kind of think, okay, we know God still works through messed up people, but what would have been the right thing to do? Well, of course, first of all, the right thing would have been for Laban not to deceive Jacob altogether. But even with his deception, what would have been the right thing for Jacob to do? Yeah, and not to deceive his brother. And then in this situation, I think he could have stopped with the wife that he received in the first place. We already have a pattern. We already know from before this that every time you add wives is not a good thing. And we're really going to see it in this scenario that it's not a good thing for anyone. I think if you boil down the generations, you could boil them down in 2 words. With Abraham and Sarah, you could boil it down to the word laughter, because Isaac ultimately is the laughter, God's promise. And when you get down to Jacob, it's wrestling. It's wrestling in the womb. It's wrestling with his brother. And now we're going to see wives and servants of wives. And there's a whole lot of wrestling, because as we move on, I would say in chapter, this following passage and on into chapter 30, we get into what I would call the baby wars. Who can have the most babies? Who can provide him with sons? So, verse 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben. Reuben means to see. Okay, so for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now. Okay. In that culture, as a woman, you gained value if you married. And then you became even more valuable if you produced children. But the most important thing was to produce heirs, to produce sons. And so she produces a son, and she names him. In Bible times, names were really important. Names often said something about your destiny or your purpose. In this situation, she names him, and it kind of is a statement of how she feels. Okay, my husband doesn't notice me, but God notices me. He sees me, and he's helping me out. Verse 33, she conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, because the Lord has heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too. So she named him Simeon. Simeon means one who hears. So first God's seen her. Now God has heard. She's already produced one son, and now she's produced another son. So God has seen her. God has heard her. Verse 34, again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, now at last my husband will become attracted to me, because I have bore him 3 sons. So she named him Levi. And Levi, that means attracted. So what is this poor woman doing? She is desperately trying to get the attention of her husband. And verse 35, she conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, this time I will praise the Lord. So she named him Judah, which means praise. Then she stopped having children. So she's produced him 4 sons. Now, we don't know if she produced daughters as well. We will find out that there's one daughter in particular that they mention, but surely there are probably other daughters involved in the household. But Dinah will be mentioned later because she's very important following in the story later on. So 4 boys. Chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, give me children or I will die. A little melodramatic, isn't it? She has his favor. She has all his attention. She has his love, but she is jealous of her sister because her sisters had 4 kids. This is probably the first time in Rachel's life in which she's ever been envious of her older sister. Now, I want to also just point out the irony. She says, give me children or what? I will die. And how did she die? In childbirth with Benjamin. Careful what you say. Verse 2, Jacob became angry with her and said, am I in the place of God? Who has kept you from having children? Then she said, here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and I can build a family through her. Now, we've seen this happen before, haven't we? Sarah says, God promised me a kid, but I'm not having a kid, so here, take Hagar. How'd that work out? Not too well, right? And so we're repeating the same kind of mistakes. From generation to generation, we have a tendency to do that. We're pretty good at repeating mistakes sometimes. Verse 4, so she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son. Because of this, she named him Dan, which means vindicated. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won. So she named him Naphtali, which means my struggle. Then Leah saw that she had stopped having children. She took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. If my sister can do it, I can do it too. Now, it happened in that society, but good grief, these poor servant ladies, they have no say in anything. Do you notice? They have no say. They don't even get to name their own children. They're the servant, and who they're serving even names the kids because, quote, they're not really theirs. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, what good fortune. So she named him Gad, and Gad means either good fortune or troop. And that sentence that she says, what good fortune, it can be translated fortune or a troop coming. So both would be equivalent. You have good fortune if there's a troop coming that's coming to rescue you or save you. And so the words are interchangeable. So she feels fortunate. Then verse 12, Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, how happy I am. The women will call me happy. So she named him Asher, which means happy. During wheat harvest, Reuben went out to the fields and found some mandrake plants, which he brought to his mother Leah. Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrake plants. If you look up mandrake plants, that it was a particular plant that they believed actually helped with fertility. Okay, so he's got these plants. He gives them to his mother. This is going to help her out, and Rachel wants some of them. So here we have the two sisters who are battling it out, who can have the most kids, who can produce the most sons, and now they're in a negotiation. This is the original sister's wife kind of program. Verse 15, but she said to her, wasn't it enough that you took away my husband? Will you take my son's mandrakes too? Leah's acknowledging, I don't really have his attention. You've got him. I don't get him. And very well, Rachel said, you can sleep with him tonight in return for your son's mandrakes. Wow. Now, okay, these women have all been treated as a possession, and now the role reversal has happened. Now Jacob is being treated as a possession. You can have him if I can have these plants. It's comical if it wasn't so sad. Verse 16. So when Jacob came in from the fields that night, Leah went out to meet him. You must sleep with me, she said. I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he slept with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she became pregnant and bore Jacob a fifth son. Then Leah said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband. So she named him Issachar, which means reward. Notice none of these names have anything to do with any future for any of these boys. It's all on how the women feel in regard to some almost like a consolation prize because of the conflict that's in this whole messed up family. Verse 19, Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has presented me with a precious gift. This time my husband will treat me with honor, because I have bore him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulon, which means honor. You can hear with every name that she gives to these sons the heartache that she has. Sometime later, she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. That's just a little footnote that basically I think Moses gives us, because Dinah is going to become very important later on, and we need to know, where's this girl come from? Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, God has taken away my disgrace. She named him Joseph and said, may the Lord add to me another son. And so Joseph means may he add. So, okay, I'm going to tell a little story now. We'll pause for a moment. I'm going to tell on my son at this moment. When Justin was really little, he just, I think by his nature, he was a collector. He liked to collect things that he liked, and so I found it rather comical at times. He was really into Sesame Street when he was real little. Loved to watch Sesame Street and wanted anything Sesame Street. And so on a particular Christmas, we got him several little Sesame Street sets, box sets, with the background of the Sesame Street scene, a box set with Sesame Street and a train, and I can't remember exactly how many, but there were several, and he opened them with delight, the wrapping paper, and he looked at them, but he didn't even take everything out of the box before he turned it over to the back, which on the back of the box had pictures of other sets, to which he said, I would like this one, and this one, and this one. He got these, but he wanted to add to his collection before he had even unwrapped the box. And here we have Rachel, who's been longing to be able to have her own son for a long time, and she has Joseph, and the only thing the woman can think of is, I want another one. One isn't enough. Which, I can't help but to wonder, as Joseph gets older, what does my name mean? Why was I called this? And why is that? Why is that? It's all this rivalry. It's all this wrestling. It's all this struggling that's going on that creates that kind of mindset. Verse 25. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, send me on my way so that I can go back to my own homeland. Give me my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I have done for you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. He added, name your wages and I will pay them. Okay, so he's trying to keep him longer, and so he's, don't go. I'll start paying you. You've paid for my two daughters, and you're kind of working for me, and we're a family. But now you want separate wages. I'll pay you." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you, and how your livestock have fared under my care. The little you had before I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" Now, if you've ever experienced haggling, you know that haggling is something where you diminish the value of what you really want, or you kind of go back and forth. And I know when I lived in Haiti, that culture, you haggled over everything. And if you were a foreigner, whatever it was that you wanted to purchase, they named a price that was way more than they would get from anybody else. And if you didn't know better, you would pay 10 or 20 times more the value of something. And you had to learn that you must haggle or you will just be ripped off. And I was extremely honored by the end of my year being there, one of my last times of going to the market and haggling, and one of the Haitians said, "You buy like a Haitian buys." And I'm like, yes, I've learned how to do this. Notice that Jacob says, you had so little of a flock, and I've increased it greatly. Now, we didn't read too long ago, he was really impressed at those sheep that Rachel brought to the well, right? When he first met her. But suddenly, looking back, that was nothing. You really didn't have hardly anything, and the only reason you're where you are is because of me. The deceivers are still working on each other and against one another. Verse 31. "What shall I give you?" he asked. "Don't give me anything," Jacob replied. "But if you will do this one thing for me, I will go on tending your flocks and watching over them. Let me go through all the flocks today and remove from them every speckled or spotted sheep, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted or speckled goat. They will be my wages, and my honesty will testify for me in the future whenever you check on the wages you have paid me. Any goat in my possession that is not speckled or spotted, or any lamb that is not dark-colored, will be considered stolen." So, he's saying, you'll be able to look at the flock and know if I'm cheating, because would you really enter into an agreement with Jacob if it was just based upon his quote honesty? No, me neither. But he's saying you can check the flocks and you'll know. And so, "Agreed," said Laban. "Let it be as you have said." That same day he removed all the male goats that were streaked or spotted, and all the speckled and spotted female goats, all that had white on them, and all the dark-colored lambs. He placed them in the care of his sons. Then he put a 3-day journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob continued to tend the rest of Laban's flocks. So they separate the flocks, and then it's like, okay, he has his portion of the flock. Then Jacob, however, took fresh cut branches from poplar, almond, and plane trees, and made white stripes on them by peeling the bark and exposing the white inner wood of the branches. Then he placed the peeled branches in all the watering troughs, so that they would be directly in front of the flocks when they came to drink. When the flocks were in heat and came to drink, They mated in front of the branches. They bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. Jacob set apart the young of the flock by themselves, but made the rest face the streaked or dark-colored animals that belonged to Laban. Thus he made separate flocks for himself and did not put them with Laban's animals. Whenever the stronger females were in heat, Jacob would place the branches in the troughs in front of the animals so that they would mate near the branches. But if the animals were weak, he would not place them there. So the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones went to Jacob. In this way, the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to his own large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Let's read on a little bit. Chapter 31. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken everything our father has owned and has gained all of this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah and to come out of the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have worked for your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and given it to me. Okay, we'll stop there at verse 9. I wanted to read down through there because what Jacob is doing with these branches, that ultimately is not what determined how the flocks would come out. He's using a practice of that day, somewhat of a superstitious practice of that day, okay? But ultimately, he does, when he addresses his wives, he finally gives the credit to whom the credit is owed, and that is God. God has a plan. God is going to work through Jacob. God is blessing Jacob in spite of how Laban is trying to undercut him and work against him. And it just makes me mindful of the scripture that says, if God be for us, who can be against us? God has a way of overriding everything, and God is working still in Jacob's life to ultimately bless him, in spite of the fact that the man is a crafty, underhanded kind of guy that I don't know. I don't think I would want to have him as a friend, honestly. I certainly wouldn't want him selling me a car. But God has a plan, and he has a plan for each of us. And so he's gonna be working it out. And I like that ultimately Jacob at least acknowledges that God is blessing him. Any comments, questions? Yes. Yes.